what is it we do here? Yeah.
Who am I? Where am I?
Right.
What's going on? But also, 2025.
2025. And already it feels like we're ready for 2026.
Oh
so
my
much
God.
has happened.
I think, Andrew, I think it was what? It was like January 5th or 6th. I think I texted you or something. I'm like, how does it feel like the wheels have already come off of 2025?
Right.
It's like a week into the new year. But yeah, 2025 season has started just started off on a bang.
Yes.
So much.
Yes. With a lot of crazy stuff and interesting stuff and potentially quite transformative stuff happening.
Yeah, almost to the point where it's like, okay, 2025. Slow down a little bit.
Right.
This is getting a little crazy.
Well, you saw it on my Substack. I think what was it this week? I posted three posts.
times.
I mean, I'm trying to do one a week, but too much happened.
I think I need to blame you for that because I think you were throwing my like circadian rhythm of the week off because I was like, wait a minute, today's not Sunday, or like whatever, and I'm like, wait, was that this weekend? You're like, no, I just had 2 this week already. And it's like Tuesday.
Yeah.
So it's been crazy, but it is nice, to be back. And it's a little odd. We've had so many guests and so many live shows.
I know this is the first time it's been me and you for a while.
I know we're back in our cozy little studio here, at the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Mm-hmm. And also I'm like, I almost feel like empowered because we don't have a guest or somebody joining us today. Right. Or I'm like, if we need to, we can stop or do whatever.
I know.
It's
those guests.
You have to be so much more professional when you're wasting someone else's time.
See, it's a pity we have video here as well. Otherwise, I'd made some crack about you being here in your pajamas.
Well, you can't see the bottom half,
right? So.
The question is, am I wearing shoes? Right. That's,
right.
At least this time of year. Well, I will say I feel also a little ridiculous because the rest of the country in the United States, for example, and many places in the world are experiencing very like fierce winter storms and all this stuff. And, I'm like, I'm freezing. It's 60 degrees. And I'm like, when did I become so, so weak with weather where I'm like, everyone's, this snowstorms and all this disruption. I'm like, we had clouds. We had some clouds the other day.
Major problems.
So, but yeah, because I used to be someone who I feel like handled and somewhat enjoyed like very inclement weather. And it was like, the days where the weather would be not fit for man or beast was like, that was the day for me.
Well, see, I'm still there. Yeah. I can't cope with all this sunshine.
The sunshine, yes, I agree with that because I'm terrible as someone who has no hair atop his head. I'm always worried about too much sun exposure. But the other night, so my oldest child is playing lacrosse, right? Mm-hmm. So they're out at the fields in the evening. And I sit there, and it's like 50-something degrees when the sun goes down. And I had 2 winter jackets on.
Right.
Not 1, 2. And there may have been a blanket.
But you're the guy with the heated socks, correct?
That's right, yes. Yes, I was going to say,
in Arizona.
With battery-powered heated socks, because my toes go so cold. I have to sell... Thank you to my mother who sent me. I was complaining about my toes getting cold, and she's the one who sent me the heated socks. So thank you, Mom. I wear them every Tuesday and Thursday at lacrosse practice to make sure that I don't. But it's ridiculous. It's like 60 degrees, and I'm like freezing. Right. It's absurd. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, AI is going to fix all of that. I have no idea how, but apparently it is.
That's the promise, right? It's going to fix everything. So. And I think maybe it's worth taking just a quick moment too to send our thoughts and hopes for people in the LA area who are experiencing some horrific wild fires that are raging. Are they still called wildfires when they're like in town like that?
But whatever.
However,
they
have fires.
Horrific.
Yeah.
And of course, when this episode goes out, it'll be a couple of weeks after we're recording. But just looking at the footage at the moment, it is devastating.
Yeah, and of course we have friends, colleagues, family, even listeners, of course, that are in the LA area. So, wishing everybody, a safe a time through this and whatever, because it's going to be difficult, I think, for everyone in that area. Because also, just seeing the photograph, the imagery, I mean, it's just you don't even recognize it. It's just awful. Yep. So, our thoughts and feelings go out to those who are impacted by that because it'll be a lot of people. So, but crazy enough. But so. Yeah, well, should we start out officially? Should we kick off our first show of the new year?
We
essentially?
should.
All right, here we go. And welcome to Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? I'm one of your hosts, Sean Leahy, and I'm joined, as always, by my colleague,
Andrew Maynard.
And here we are. And we are excited to be, again, like I said, we're kicking 2025 off and with a slow your roll because it feels like it's gone crazy.
Yep.
Okay. So for today, I think there were so many things when we were pulling notes together for this show. There were so many things because as we were kind of talking in the cold open, so many things have been happening. I mean, we have, when we were doing our end of the year roundup, things that hadn't even happened yet were things like, I mean, we can save these for another time, but I mean, it's like we had, probes going through the corona of the sun. Right. We have these are major human technology milestones that I feel like, they're already old news and we're a week into the new year. It's insane.
That was so last week.
It was so last week. It's just insane. But of course, I think that the headline that grabbed so much attention, which I think we have to spend some time on this, is this sort of broad call from Sam Altman from OpenAI about AGI.
Yes.
Or artificial general intelligence.
Yes. And AI agents.
Yes.
Which he believes this is going to be the year that things get really big.
Yeah. And so maybe to kind of set the stage, do you want to take a stab at kind of just high level describing what AGI even is? I'm going to turn to Andrew, solve this for me. What is AGI?
So here's the thing. AGI, used to be this thing where we said when we have artificial intelligence that is so versatile that it can do pretty much anything a human can do, that is the tipping point.
Yeah.
And this is where the general comes into this. However, we've seen a drift away from there. So now companies like OpenAI, whose mission is to build AGI, have redefined what AGI is.
Yeah.
And it's a little cynical because it feels like they're doing something, then they're redefining it and saying, hey, look, we hit the bullseye.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that happening. On the other hand, there is this idea that we're heading towards a point where we can create artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence-based machines that general purpose machines. You don't have to have one app or one machine or one AI for every single task. The billions of tasks that exist out there. You can have one system and you can train it to do a myriad different things like you can a human. And some of those things are going to be in cyberspace or just like a chatbot talking to you. Or increasingly, AGI is being coupled with robots.
Yeah.
So now you can get these AI systems, these AGI systems, actually doing stuff in the real world. And the key to this is problem solving. So the ideal, maybe not the ideal AGI, but certainly one of the visions is an AI system that can problem solve by having a goal or a set of goals, identifying problems, working out how to solve them, and taking actions autonomously on its own to solve them. It doesn't require a human to give it permission to do things. It just does things. And it works out what the best way of achieving its goals is.
And what could possibly go wrong?
I know. Yes.
Well, and I think it's important too. I think so. A term that you will hear a lot increasing. I mean, I think someone had asked me a question. I think it was on LinkedIn or something. Had posted this question like, "What do you think about this term agentic AI?" Because that's exactly what.
Right.
So you'll hear this term, this agentic AI, and it'll be really interesting because it's tough for me because there's what I want to see happen, and then there's also a high level of skepticism that I have around who's claiming they've got these things sorted. Because I do think, and this will be, I think, become old hat on our show here of listening to me say, but it's the marketing hype is but that's often. And so even coming back to this AGI from the beginning, I mean, this goes back, I think, even like a year or so, maybe even longer. OpenAI changing or providing their own definition of AGI, which for me, that does not sit well because it does often feel like, because there is so much hype, there is so much market pressure for, you look at a company like, and they're not alone. I mean, Google's in there. I mean, all the major players, right?
Yep.
But you look at something like OpenAI, who are, they are trying to raise I mean, what was the last number? $7 trillion was the target or something like that.
Money, yes.
I mean, more money than is just, I mean, it's hard to even fathom the scale of cash that they're talking about.
Yep.
And so there's pressure, and there's always pressure.
Yes,
What's because we've had ChatGPT 4 and it's, you know, sort of subvariants of 4.0, 4.0 mini, all these kind of things. But people are saying, well, where's 5? Because now you know, I mean, that's the problem.
Actually, we're on to 03 now. So we've moved from the 4 series to the O series. We've got 01, 03 is on the horizon.
They've learned maybe from like Xbox. Just change the name radically and go from one, you know, it's Xbox, you know, Xbox 360, then to Xbox One. Change the name and people don't get so excited about the increment. But nonetheless, people are like, what's next? Especially because, you know, if you look at the stock market, I mean, there's you will never satisfy that.
Of course.
It's always what's next, what's more. And so my concern, as always, with these components is that a company or entity will feel so much pressure to produce the next thing. That one easier way to do that is just pick up the goalpost, move it closer, and there you have it. Now you can claim we've done it. We've done this other thing. So I do, that is a big level of skepticism that I will carry.
Although I would temper that by saying this is how innovation works.
True.
Certainly within the US ecosystem. And for decades now, companies have succeeded by pushing the imagination of what they claim they're going to do and then catching up. Sometimes it goes horribly wrong because you end up innovating just to meet those market expectations. But when it goes right, you have that pull of the imagination. So I'm not too down on this. And it seems to be part and parcel of how the innovation ecosystem works.
And I mean, I think I've shared this before, but it's maybe worth touching on it again is, you know, with my skepticism, it's mostly out of concern that we'll lose that. We'll lose that. We'll lose, you know, that important innovation, that it will actually be transformative. We'll lose that with the collateral damage of the marketing PR fallouts of.
I absolutely agree. So, and if you sort of think about the model, that there is this sort of naive idea that if you allow these innovators just to push forward and allow the market to drive wonderful things, it will benefit society. But actually, I don't think we see that. And what I think we need here more than ever is societal benefits drive the innovation. So that idea of creating public value and public good. And if you can create that sweet spot where you've got commercial good or fiscal good, so you thrive as a company, but at the same time, you are creating massive public value. You are serving society. That's where we need to be. And I think the danger is if you have a divergence between those, you've got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help kind of put it in perspective too, when we're talking, so, I mean, in some ways, would it be fair to say that when it comes to artificial intelligence, this, what we call AGI, regardless of how you might slice that definition up from what it has been previously to maybe more new reconfigured definitions, but that's essentially sort of like the achievement in some ways, right? I mean, in terms, I mean, it's kind of been talked about that way for the last 30 plus years.
It has. So actually, I think we're actually beginning to diverge from that as well. So yes, there has been this vision of AI as machines that can problem solve and generally problem solve with agency like humans do. And once we've got that, that is the pinnacle. I actually think the more we learn and the more we achieve, the more we realize that's probably not the right goal, because we're seeing AI systems develop now that I think can do things we didn't even dream of. And we're having to remap out what our expectations and what our dreams are of I'm not even sure that AI really sort of captures this, but it's machines that can do things that transform the world.
And I think one thing, a distinction to make, I think also as we're talking about this AGI, this artificial general intelligence, is to compare that also for people who have experience using tools like generative AI tools. Those are considered narrow, or weak.
That's right.
AI, right? So these are things that can do one task, or you can. A task or two, maybe, whatever. But they're considered very narrow. And I think one of the things that's also very challenging as we think about it, and I do want to spend some time because there's an interesting call out too that I want to kind of go over that kind of looks at some of the challenges of kind of rebuking this claim Because the claim was from Sam Altman that we know how to do this.
That's right. So he said, we know how to build AGI. 2025 is probably the year that we get agentic AI, so these AI agents, and that is essentially going to be AGI. And he actually went further and said, because we know how to do this, that's a bit boring now, so we need to go to the next step.
Yes.
And he said, what we really want to do is create super intelligence.
And there's the danger word, right?
Right.
That's the red. That's the red. And first of all, I have to commend you on a great memory, because I have the quote pulled up here and you nailed it. But maybe I'll read it. So this came from Sam Altman's blog, Reflections. Lots of interesting things there to go through and read, of course. But the snippet that is here as he's talking about turning to 2025 and beyond is that this is the quote, we are now confident we know how to build AGI as we have traditionally understood it. We believe that in 2025, we may see the first AI agents, that's the agentic part, join the workforce.
Right.
And materially change the output of companies. We continue to believe that iteratively putting great tools in the hands of people leads to great, broadly distributed outcomes. The next paragraph goes on to say, we are beginning to turn our aim beyond that, and here's the word, to superintelligence, in the true sense of the word. We love our current products, but we are here for the glorious future. With superintelligence, we can do anything else. Superintelligent tools could massively accelerate scientific discovery and innovation well beyond what we are capable of doing on our own, and in turn, massively increase abundance and prosperity. So
and there's the hype.
And so all we have to do is give you all the money in the world and you will solve all the problems. But so what I think the part to pick on here too, and you know, I can go through some other pieces kind of piece by piece, but I think one of the, so again, kind of taking a step back and looking at this sort of somewhat historically over the, again, I'm just using 30 years as a benchmark, because these are terms and concepts and things that have been researched and written about and talked about for, again, decades.
A long time.
A long time.
Yep.
But it was this idea of like, if we could get to AGI, right, however long that takes, the time it would take to get from AGI to super intelligence would be very quick.
Right.
And that is usually that. So when you hear, again, going back to conversations that have been raging around this for decades, the sort of existential fear, concerns, theory,
and this goes to the singularity, that things start moving so fast that in the blink of an eye, we're suddenly living in a different world.
That's right. And so it's this idea that, right, when you can get to a machine that has, again, how you define superintelligence, it's anything smarter than what humans are capable of. And we're capable of a lot of cool stuff.
Right.
But that creates this tipping point. Once that happens, it's sort of like the genie's out of the bottle. You can never put it back. And then, you know, I mean, it's at this point science fiction fodder for what happens there. But that is a point that a lot of people, and the list is long of, you know, people and, you know, sort of big tech celebrity status people on both sides of that argument, going back again decades, arguing. I mean, even Elon Musk himself, that was the whole reason OpenAI was started in the first place, was to avoid a closed system obtaining super intelligence and destroying the world.
That is it. And this is what makes this so bizarre. So yes, you go back to, when was it? 2015, 2016, somewhere around there, where Elon Musk and a couple of other people said, this is a massive existential risk. We've got to slow down and think carefully about what the consequences of building this so-called superintelligence are. And the irony is, Elon Musk still talks in this way, but he's ahead of the curve in trying to build these things. So you've got to wonder sort of how you,
what's the deal?
Where that cognitive dissonance comes from.
It's interesting. And because, I mean, at that point, I mean, you get to some of the, so there's some, I'll put a link in our notes so people can go read the full thing, but that's where you get to these sort of thought experiments that have been, they're very simplistic, but can be fun to, but you already know what I'm going to go with. Right?
You're going to go with paperclip.
Paperclip maximizer. And I mean, and just for our listeners, I'll simplify it as I'll reduce it as much as I can, which is essentially that if you have an AI system, so let's just use Sam Altman's promise here, right? We have these new agentic systems are entering the workforce. We have, let's call it Paperclip AI. And we say, Paperclip AI, we're a paperclip company. We want to maximize our profits by selling and making the most amount of paperclips that we can. Okay, you know, and it marches off. Well, that was a terrible robot voice. Or maybe not. Maybe, you know.
Yes.
Maybe not. Okay, you know. But so it goes off and it does these things. We fast forward, it reaches general intelligence and then quickly become super intelligent. And the idea or the fear of this thought experiment is that if a system would become super intelligent to the point where it could be autonomous, it could do things in the real world that, other than being, there's always the joke that you just unplug it, but, we'll see. But again, this idea that this super intelligent system was like, it had one prerogative, which to maximize the production and manufacture of paperclips. And so the joke is that its existential risk to humanity was it doesn't like you, it doesn't love you, but you are made of atoms that can be repurposed to make paperclips. And so essentially it destroys everything on the planet to make nothing but paperclips.
That's right. Yes.
So it's this runaway existential, which is, of course, it's a sort of a reductio ad absurdum, this fun.
It really is. But the idea is we give one of these agentic AIs a goal or a set of goals that we think are smart goals, but we don't think about the consequences of religiously following those goals and what the fallout is. And that really pushed a lot of thinking around values alignment with AI to make sure that they also embody what we might consider to be human values, so they don't do things that harm humanity. The difficulty is, how do you define what that value set is? Because it's different across the globe and from person to person.
In these conversations, we hope are stimulating some future pub or cafe talks, because this is where you can have a lot of fun. I mean, honestly, with these kind of things, because you quickly can draw the parallel of, well, the most dangerous thing to a human is a human. Therefore, to save the humans, we must remove the humans. And so you can find yourself in these really kind of fun philosophical pickles where you're like, well, actually, the most dangerous thing to humans is other humans.
So I've got to sort of come in here because there's a really important strand to thinking on this point. So if you look at what Sam Altman and others are saying about superintelligence being able to solve problems that have previously been insolvable, they're thinking in very, very mechanistic ways. They're thinking about sort of building stuff. They're not really thinking about human problems like human relationships, like sort of
quality
personal
of
identity.
Life. I mean, in terms
quality of life.
Quality of life in terms of that's not a quantifiable, measurable thing.
That's right.
Or dollar amount.
Or even international relations, geopolitics, I mean, sort of human thriving. So all of these are very, very human problems where it's not clear at all that there are clear solutions, simply because the solution space doesn't allow for perfect solutions. So this assumption that a machine can somehow solve human problems, I think, is incredibly naive. And it gets you into a lot of deep water if you think you can create a machine and give it a certain set of goals like increase human happiness. And the fallout from that, if it's done too naively, could be enormous, because there's a really good way of increasing human happiness, and that's get rid of all the humans that are unhappy. Perfect.
There you go, done. Or use like a very simplistic economic formula of happiness equals wants over needs. And then it's like, well, just play with that formula. If you don't need anything, you're happy. If you don't want anything, you're happy. Well, and I think there's a really good example there too of, and I think a good place for people to start if they're curious of is just the alignment problem. I mean, there's a term for that which is the alignment problem that has existed in machine learning and all that exactly gets at that same issue, is how no matter what task or I don't even want to say whatever code or boundaries you're giving a computerized mechanistic system, how does it know how to align that with because we say things, but we understand that there's this deeper level of meaning. And there's all these nuances. When we communicate, how much of our communication, if you just distill it just down to say text-based communication, well, we know as humans, when we talk, when we communicate, there's so many more cues. When we're exchanging conversations, also all of our cultural, everything we share, everything, our communities, our rings of communities where they either overlap or converge or don't, that becomes a part of the conversation. To your point about geopolitical elements. I mean, it's very nuanced and what's amazing is how seamlessly we as humans do this without even thinking about it.
We've had a few years to evolve.
That's right. Exactly. And so, I mean, I think there's some big issues.
However, and so this is where I struggled with this. So this framing that you're getting primarily from Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley type thinking, which is very sort of mechanistic, mechanical. I worry about, but at the same time, you look at where the possibilities are going with AI. And you think beyond just those narrow constraints. I think that we're seeing paradigm shifts here. So, for instance, if you look at capabilities, not just to build large language models that deal with text, but you create multimodal models that can now sort of take in images and video, and they can begin to understand and interpret body language and context. We're building physics models or physical models that understand sort of how things work in the physical world. We are actually beginning to create models that can emulate what it means to be human. I'm not saying that they are human or they have consciousness or awareness, but they can certainly emulate to a large degree what it's like actually being a person. And I think that opens up possibilities that we haven't even thought about with the long history of AI up to this point, at least not in depth.
Yeah. And that's also a fantastic transition to another, to another. I think another piece I think falls right into this, which is very much related to that exact thing. Is this idea of creating synthetic people, like I mean, literally creating synthetic users through AI.
Yeah, you're not thinking about Facebook, are you?
I'm thinking about Meta.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, let's get this right.
Which is fun. I'm like, who uses Facebook anymore? I don't know. I do know some, of course. So yeah, I mean, and it's funny too, because I say funny, I shouldn't mean that. I find it amusing in some ways. So this announcement from Meta around their use, their existing use and planned use of completely synthetic AI-driven social media users, has also already been sort of overshadowed by this bombshell that they dropped there. They're like, we're not doing fact checking anymore. We're moving. And I'm like, oh, again, 2025, please slow down. I'm going to ask you again, slow down. But yeah, it's been one, and this is not a new thing. I mean, especially since Gen AI tools became available very quickly. A lot of these sort of like avatar type or these bots. I mean, we've seen this grow.
We have, and platforms like Character AI, which is very controversial, but they create these artificial characters that people actually build relationships with.
Yeah, and those have been in the news for good things, for horrible, tragic things that have happened as well. But it has been interesting that we have seen this incredible rise of these AI bots and avatars across all these different platforms. What's interesting, and I guess I kind of look at this with this level of amusement where I'm like, because social media, I mean, that's a whole nother topic of how people feel about that. And I mean, we've seen in the news, you cannot look up or talk about social media without getting social media is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's also the best thing that's ever happened, right? So there's all this mix, and there's a lot of nuance, and everyone, I think I heard someone say, maybe it was even this morning, that everyone thinks social media is bad, but no one can agree on why. Right?
I've got some really good reasons why it's bad.
Everyone's like, everyone agrees social media is bad for you, but no one can agree on why or which part of it is bad for you or something. But it is interesting to see this because, the instant thing is like, okay, AI synthetic people are flooding, so meta properties.
So we're not even talking about bots anymore.
This
is a level.
They've gone
several levels beyond bots.
Yeah. And if you've ever looked at the comments in YouTube, you know what a bot looks like. And bots, and those have gotten a lot of coverage over the last like 10 years or so, especially with spreading disinformation, propaganda even. There's been a lot of accusations. I don't know how much of them have been discovered in terms of the true origin, but foreign political campaigns, trying to influence
and manipulate society.
And there's a lot of common playbooks. So flooding the zone is a term you'll hear with these kind of things too. Is like just take a bunch of garbage information, dump it over there, and there's so much of it, people will either believe it or it'll be so much they can't sift through any of to figure out what's real and what's not. So we win that way, right? Or whatever, or whatever the goal is. Winning. I don't know what that means, but so there has been that. But now we're using the advancements in these AI tools to create like very convincing personas or people that don't exist, right? And these aren't real people. These are
but they have simulated lives.
Simulated lives. They interact on their own. So these things will, they like posts, they'll create posts, they'll talk to you, and they'll send direct messages. So in a way, they are sort of turned loose into these environments.
And do we know why Meta is doing this?
Well, there's the cynical response,
right?
Which, especially for Facebook, right? They're losing users like crazy, and so what better way?
So I've got to tell you, I've just gone back onto Facebook, and it's miserable. So I was hacked forever ago.
Just leave it.
And
I
just couldn't work out how to get my account back, so I let it go. But I thought, to stay in touch with family and friends, I ought to be on there again. So I'm slowly building up the presence. It is a miserable place.
Well, it's funny because I ghosted my account. So I never officially closed. It's the same thing, especially international. Like it's such a connector that it's like, I don't want to sever those ties forever. But at the same time, I can't use the platform. But, Instagram, still use that. In fact, Modem Futura has an Instagram account. So give us a follow there. But it's really interesting that, so one, I feel like my initial gut reaction to why would they do this? Is one of like, follow the money. They need more users or want to control engagement.
Right.
And what better way to do that than put your thumb on the scale and be like, well, we created these.
It's almost like ringers. You put the ringers in, you expect people to sort of follow along.
That's right. But it's interesting. And of course, I think very quickly after that initial, and this announcement came it was like the last week it was like December 30th or maybe right in there that they were like, oh, and by the way, we're doing this and plan to do it more. And I also had a gut reaction, which was like, oh, well, if we need more downloads, can we just create synthetic podcast listeners?
Right. Yes.
I'm like, okay. If we're changing the rules, okay. Like, we could. How long will it take me to spin up a fan club of all synthetic people?
See, I love this idea. Why do we need real people?
Yeah. So we never said this. This never happened. So when our ratings go through the roof. Yes. I can say as of now, all of our listeners are human. I think. How would I know? Actually, that's a good question.
Yes.
But I was thinking about this also, just going through. So again, looking at social media feed, like the places I spend personally the most amount of time would probably be LinkedIn and Instagram. Are probably the two social media platforms that I personally spend the most amount of time in. And, I was thinking about it today, and also a callback to our fantastic live holiday episode.
I think people should watch because it was an amazing conversation.
And you can watch us on YouTube, and you can see the most ridiculous Christmas jumpers. And it was just so much fun. And we had essentially the entire cast of CSI, the Center for Science and the Imagination.
Here at ASU, which was amazing.
Fantastic. But Ruth Wiley, who was on there, and she's been on a couple times now, she raised, I think it was her who raised the question of like, how, again, coming back to this, the Turing, sort of loosely invoking the Turing test, but online, which was like, how would I know if I'm talking to a real person or she didn't use these terms, but now I'll use it with this. How would you know if you're talking to this new follower that says like, great picture. I love what you're doing. Send me your contact or whatever. How would you know, if you don't know them in the real world, how would you know whether or not that's actually a true person? Knowing that it's gone beyond the bot level. It's not a, what was the dead giveaway back in the day on Twitter was like, it would still have the egg picture icon, right? With no information. It was very, you're like, that's not a real person. But now, picture, not just a profile picture, but like photographs. A family. Detailed, a blog,
it's effectively artificial memories.
Right? And so it started. I was really, I was walking this morning and just really was thinking about that. Like, how would I know if I'm being followed or interacting with an AI? And I'm like, I honestly wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. I mean, I think like most people. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say most people. I personally, like when someone sends me a LinkedIn follow request, I usually always click on the person. I look at, kind of see who they are. I look at, because I mean, also, this is not tale for another day, but when did LinkedIn just become like the telemarketing for online, so I get a lot of that. But just, I kind of do my own verification that this is a real person.
Yes. But I'm like, how would you know?
That would be so easily faked.
Yes.
Because I don't do any follow up. I mean, they have the little verification badge, but again, sure, a fake person can validate their own way, or if it's the platform doing it, they can just give,
And again, apart from some supposed way of making money by demonstrating sort of numbers on your platform, it's hard to work out what the value add of this is. Because so just pulling back from this, if I was unknowingly engaging with synthetic people, I don't want that. I want connections with real people. On the other hand, if I intentionally made that decision to engage with synthetic personas, I can see the value in there. If I wanted, say, a community of AIs to bounce ideas around and to shoot the breeze with around sort of topics that I couldn't find real humans, and I knew that they were synthetic, that would be fine. But it's the knowing and it's the decisions which really worry me here.
Yeah, and I think I would 100% agree with that, because I think what we're seeing is like, right, well, the Bond villain has decided what the master plan is here, right? And so we stumble across, part 2 of a 10-part plan to take over the world. But it is interesting because same thing. You're like, well, okay, is it a technological flex of we can, so we did, because we want to just see? Because hey, at the end of the day, the engineers are people too, and they're like, "Hey, we can do this.
Right? Can we try it?"
Yes. Also, again, a platform like Meta and Facebook also do not have a good track record of thinking about the unintended consequences or even the known terrible consequences of messing with their user base and stuff like this. Is long documented. So there is that. But then also, it's like, well, what's the, because now the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. It's like, okay, so is it for numbers? Are you desperate for people, or are you trying to manipulate?
See, if I was a master villain, and your sort of 10-step sort of plan to world domination got me thinking here.
Yeah.
One thing I would do if I was sort of following this pathway was just flood social media with these synthetic personas and do that for a few years, so people get this trusted circle of entities on social media that they really like, they really enjoy connecting with, they feel an obligation to, and then start to feed in the manipulation.
Yeah. And it's so I'll throw in another term here, right there, that people often develop, especially if it's a more like a celebrity or a prominent figure, right? I mean, social media is a wonderful place to develop parasocial relationships,
right? Yes,
right. So you, it's a person you don't know in real life, but you feel like you know them.
That's right. Yes,
and they can have a lot of influence with that, right? And so there is this huge danger of exactly that, right? Where it's like, so your entire friend community, 98% of them aren't real people,
right?
And now those people, at the, on the back end, someone turns a dial to go from they're gonna like your soccer pictures, to turn the dial to evil and nefarious, and now you will send me money, or something worse, right? But that would be exactly it. That you could slow boil an entire community.
This is going to become the slow boil hypothesis.
Oh my gosh.
Of world domination.
Did we just? There's a chance we may have unwittingly just uncovered the evil villain mastermind plot here.
Yes.
No, but because again, this idea of synthetic users, and I'll go back and I'll say, okay, positive uses.
Yes.
I think right away, especially if you're in an area of research, if you're in research broadly defined, so that could be public research, PR marketing research, it could be university research, it could be looking at real data, especially in you have situations that have high cost, right? So both in terms of financial cost, but also the research you might want to do is dangerous to humans. And so there's a lot of issues with that. Well, if you have synthetic humans to test on, you don't have to, you're not actually harming somebody, right? Well, at least not until they have digital rights and all this kind of stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so you could hypothetically try stuff out right? Even psychological.
So dark.
I know. Like this is what keeps me up at night. Is you could do some really scary, psychologically nasty things to synthetic people to learn what works, what doesn't. As just as easily as you could also do like A/B testing with synthetic groups to see if my new advertising slogan would work.
This shows you just how fast 2025 is going. So you go back to 2024, and one of the big things was synthetic data.
Yeah.
And the idea of one aspect of synthetic data is, say you're doing human trials for a drug or an intervention or something. There are really big ethical challenges with doing that with real people.
Sure.
So, or even their data. So you create these massive databases of synthetic data that mimic real life, but you can do your experiments on them. That feels so passe now that you're talking about synthetic people to do the experiments on.
I mean, originally that was my thing with synthetic data. I'm like, oh, this makes every statistics course so much better.
Right.
Because now you can get these massive data sets around, not always using the same thing. Because that was always annoying when you, as a graduate student, you do these big, statistics courses, and you're like, the example that you get and the sample data that comes with like SPSS or whatever, it's always on something that you're not studying. So you're like, well, how is this? Okay, what does this have to do with me? But now with synthetic data, you could create massive data sets that mimic
directly relevant to you
what you're thinking about. So you can practice how to do statistics as just an example of a great way. But now you've
actually got people.
You've got people or people. I need to put air quotes on it.
So just sticking with the research theme, I can imagine this being like gold dust to say social science researchers. Where we all know if you want to survey people, how hard it is to get them. But now you can just generate 100,000 synthetic people and survey them and do stuff with them, have interviews with them, have focus groups with them.
It's completely wild. And something, because again, especially in like social science, I mean, any area of research where we and again, this is for the broader who aren't in the in this space. We talk about the N, right, which is the number of participants in a study. And so studies that have usually small N's are considered very difficult to generalize to broader populations because you're using a very small sample size, right? And so you're like, well,
not representative,
right? You're like, well, for example, if there were like these 10 humans have this one trait, therefore all humans have the, it's like that doesn't work, obviously,
right.
But then, so with synthetic data, so if you have these survey instruments, these things that you're trying to collect, where you could use synthetic data to query these, I would be really interested, also just to have to dig in very deep on how could you ensure that synthetic personas, people, data would itself be generalizable, where you could count on anything other than to say, well, in this fake population it was this, but how could we? So that's interesting. But I was actually looking this up too, and so very quickly, this doesn't take more than a quick Google search, or use whatever Perplexity or whatever else you're using. You can just syntheticusers.com. You can just buy synthetic users. But so this is, I think
I'm already thinking about my next annual review. My 200 students that I'm working with.
7,000. It went. Wait, Andrew, how did this go from 200 to 7,000?
I'm just that
and
good.
What's this receipt from createsynthetichumors.net or whatever? You're like, you saw nothing. But it is very interesting, and so I do think, if I can rewind to our show before the end of the year, I'll say, well, in 2025 we're going to see a lot of synthetic people. But I do think that this is going to be very interesting. Now, Meta and that, so and of course this encompasses Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I don't know, whatever else.
Blue Sky. No. That's the Meta stuff.
But the question is, well, I'm sure others are either already doing it or planning to do it. I mean, Twitter, X, whatever, that's been infiltrated by bots forever. So I'm sure it's, that's YouTube, I'm sure, same thing. There's bots all over, crawling all over that.
Yep.
But all these things also sort of a concern that's both interesting and notable is also sort of moving in and creating this feeling that there's nothing real, right? That's all fake.
Yep.
And that brings me to this other piece. And so I'm, I was very amused the first time I heard this term, the dead internet theory.
Yes.
But really interesting. And I don't know how familiar you are with.
I am a little familiar.
Okay.
You should describe it, though, because there are various strands of this as well in terms of how people think about it.
Yeah,
And conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, we'll stay away from the conspiracy theory part of this, which is, but essentially, you can boil this down to the dead internet theory is basically just this sort of hypothesis that most of the content on the internet is fake. And by fake, they mean it created by non-humans.
Right.
That most of the internet has been flooded essentially with content and users that are, either AI or otherwise, not real people.
Yep.
And so blog posts you're reading, the comments, and whether it be like traditional websites, news articles, and we've already seen this. I mean, there's lots of evidence that supports this that we've seen. Was it, I don't want to get the name wrong, but it wasn't CNET, but it was one of the bigger properties that was using AI generated news stories.
Right.
And they were pumping those out, and they were being checked by an editor presumably, but still, because it was like low level reporting stuff.
Right.
It was what are the Financial Times of
and
today?
I think a number of outlets have at least experimented with that.
They've experimented. Some of them caught a lot of backlash for it. So there is real evidence, which of course will fuel any conspiracy even further when there's actual evidence. But the point here is not that it's not a conspiracy, but taking a more realistic view of how much content, both in terms of static content, so web pages, articles, things like that, and also I would say dynamic content, so the users we were just talking about, that are not real humans behind them, but these bots, or in the future perhaps even agentic AIs that are just going along, living their life, so to speak.
Well, I was going to say spewing stuff out, but it's really generating stuff and getting it onto the internet.
Yeah, just getting things out. I mean, same with images. Now, before it was for the last 20 everything's always 20 years for me. And I'm like, it's much longer than that. Last 30 plus years online, for example, all images were like, that's photoshopped. Right. That's been manipulated. And now that's generated. That's a generative image.
Just quickly going back to social media, even now, every time I see an image or a video clip, I'm immediately thinking, is this real?
Yeah, is it real?
And I'm skeptical, incredibly skeptical in most cases.
Yep. And I think that's good. The danger, of course, is when people no longer are skeptical and just are like,
that's right. Yes.
And maybe if I walk the word danger back, maybe it's like, you just assume it's all BS or it's all fake, so you're not concerned.
Yes.
But the danger is in if you think it's all true or all real without that level of skepticism.
Yes. But if you look at this in a bigger sense, in fact, I think it's got a couple of implications. One is we've built this wonderful thing called the internet over the last few decades, but now it feels that that's falling apart at the seams, and the value that we thought was there is being eroded. That actually is quite concerning.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of it is when you get to the consequences with AI, where the internet certainly so far has been such an important driver of training for AI. What happens when the wheels fall off the system that is helping build the AIs that we're going to be relying on? Yeah.
I mean, you run into this situation, right? I mean, I think that echoes my concern, because it's funny because I have this like ever-present nostalgic view of like the internet, right? Where I'm like, oh, it's so pure, and it was about just connection. And then, then the dreaded 96 came in when it became commercialized, and suddenly you're like, what? Credit card? What are you talking about?
I know. Oh, those early days when you discovered the World Wide Web.
It literally was like, everything is at your finger. It was this, but also this naive new technology that was, so it's fascinating to just go through its sort of history, having been around to see it, basically. I mean, I was very young, of course, when it first came on, and I still remember in middle school being excited for this oncoming information superhighway is what it was referred to.
Yeah, I remember
watching Channel 1 News. But yeah, anyway.
And now, of course, it's the disinformation superhighway.
Now it's just become like, the Wild West. I forget what were those old roads where you'd like in like medieval times where you'd get like mugged with like the robbers and stuff.
The highwaymen.
The highwaymen, yeah. And so now it's like that,
I know.
and I always enjoy, sitcoms and things like that when they try to like actualize, like if you could go to the internet in real life, like what it would look like and how weird and just
it would not look like Tron.
No, no, it would probably be just a nightmare fuel all the way around. Right. But coming back to this idea of like the dead internet though, right? It is really fascinating to think about. And again, like today, no doubt there is a massive amount of content and interactions that are not human.
Right.
The question becomes, one, I don't think that's a conspiracy for people to do that intentionally. I think it's the byproduct of where we are today with all these things.
Yes.
Because you know what? Writing a blog post every day is hard.
Yep.
For some people, writing anything is very challenging.
Right.
For many reasons, right? Just even focusing to say, like, what am I going to write about today?
Yep.
Suddenly with AI, I
churn stuff out.
I have a nugget of an idea and I can just pop it in there and boom, there. And so now my blog has an article a day or 10 or 20.
And so actually you tie that back to agentic AI. So yes, at the moment, you can just churn a blog out every 5 minutes using something like ChatGPT, but you're still thinking about the ideas.
Yep.
If you create an AI agent where you say, I want you to become the expert in this area, and I want you to post something twice a day on this, and everything has to be unique, everything has to provide insights, you could just get it going. Now imagine 1,000, 10,000 of those out there.
I mean, think about what we could do ourselves with Modem Futura if we had an agentic AI like PR media person who would just, instead of
that's a good idea. Maybe this is going to be 2025 for us.
There's a new product. So suddenly if you see an explosion, here are going to be the tells, they're like, we're not going to mention it, but there will be signs and it'll be like, all of a sudden we're everywhere nonstop because we finally have cracked the code.
I love this synthetic person right here in agentic AI.
I mean, we already covered the notebook LLM with the fake podcast hosters.
I know.
So,
which is getting better, by the way. I don't know whether you've checked it out recently.
I know it is. And so we'll have to keep doing this canary thing where it's like, right now, everything you've heard so far is created by Andrew and Sean in the flesh, in the real world. But yeah, I mean, so, again, coming back to this, so yes, I think there's a ton of flood of information. Do I think it's going to increase? Yes, very much so, because of all these things we've just talked about.
Yep.
For me, I think there becomes this danger point, and other people, this has not been exclusive to the internet. It's been talked about just in terms of information.
Yes.
These AI models, we know how many billions of parameters and training data. Basically, they've scarfed up all of what's available on the internet
already. Yes.
And plus, perhaps you could even, I'll just make the claim loosely, all of the information we've ever created. I'm sure it's been consumed. Maybe they're still struggling with some of the scrolls.
The non-digitized stuff. There's still a lot out there.
Although I've done so many of those captchas. I've given them, I've decoded how many of those scrolls myself probably. But yes, that's an E. That's an E. But nonetheless, they've consumed all this information, and now it's also creating information.
Yes.
And you get into this perspective of like, well, are we headed towards a internet future where it is just this recursive, it's AI content in and AI content out, and it becomes this recursive like nightmare. Wow, maybe it's blissful. I don't know, but chances are probably not.
No, I think it's a great example of one of these things where we have no idea what the consequences of this are.
Yeah.
We can certainly imagine that if we as humans are not proactive in steering this in certain directions, it could be disastrous.
Sure.
The sort of default state is not looking good.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you can also see it as a move or a development that forces us to think, what does it truly mean to be human?
Yeah.
And here's the question that goes around my head. As individuals and as society, do we proactively decide that we are going to re-examine ourselves, or do we just mindlessly go along with the flow?
Give in.
And I really worry that most people are programmed to mindlessly go along with the flow. But it is an opportunity for us to start thinking about, what is it that actually makes me me? What brings value to my life?
Absolutely. And I mean, you can see, even just like loosely thinking, you can see these ideas, right? Where you're like, well, perhaps in the future, there's almost like we used to use the word in a sort of pejorative sense of the splinter net because it meant bad things, right? But what if we see a splinter net where you have purely human created content
Right,
as a
yes.
special place where compared to that becomes the signal versus noise, where it's like you have, I don't know, but I think that's a really good, that's a really great question, because it does. I think we're headed toward, whether you want to or not.
What I'm imagining in my head is you've had this movement for decades now of people going back to nature. They get rid of technology, they go back to nature. Now that's going to be transformed to they go back to human digital environments.
Yeah.
That becomes our nature.
And then you're like, and then the capture really does have some value where you're like, prove you're human, because, you know, but yeah, I wonder, and, you know, I oscillate back and forth on, you know, whether that should, how concerned I should be.
Right.
In
Yes,
thinking about this, because, I mean, obviously there's a danger where essentially the human gets cut out of the loop in some senses. Especially if this is a future filled with agentic AIs that are just, again, we're like, I don't know what's happened. And to the point where we won't be allowed to know in some cases, because it could just become again, you follow these breadcrumbs of agentic AIs. If we get to a place of AGI, which again, we can argue, I'm skeptical that that's even possible. We haven't even truly defined what human intelligence is. That does not mean, though, that we won't get to a place that can do things that collectively look like that.
That's right. Yes.
And again, as you had mentioned, I think at the top of the show, who cares? Maybe that's probably not the right goal.
That's right.
But for now, it's a place to aim.
Yes.
But the reality is, you have a distributed system of all these things doing all cool, amazing things that are operating. What's the difference? If you can't tell, what's the difference, right?
Right. Yes.
But I do wonder if you end up in this situation where those things then essentially create a closed ecosystem where they start speaking, because it's creating the content that it's consuming.
Right.
It doesn't need to do that in written English anymore, or written, fill in whatever publication you read. It can do it however it wants, because and so over time, do we end up with, think about like 10,000 years from now, we have humans that are, if we're still here, right, that are like, oh,
humans are an oddity to the side.
That's right. Or we're back to the cave, cave dwelling and stuff, and we're like, oh, big box and machine sky, and that's where the internet lives and all the communication, and we're all living in a cave, touching grass.
So the scary thing about this is, of course, this sort of evokes science fiction scenarios, especially dystopian ones, and the idea of sentience within machines. I think it can play out without self-awareness and consciousness and sentience in machines. It's just a set of processes that lead to emergent properties.
That are just continuing to run and evolve as it does. And that, I think that, I think that's crazy.
So what we do about this, I have no idea. Of course, this is our profession. It's what we do, asking questions and asking, what do we do to steer things toward a future where humans flourish?
That's right.
But actually truly understanding what we do in a world where we just seem to be overwhelmed with a tsunami of people hankering after the next big thing with AI. I'm not quite sure how to hold back the wave, or at least channel it in certain directions.
Or if you even, that'll be the interesting thing, is as we build, and this is where like some of the profession comes in, as the work we do, we think about what do these scenarios look like? And because one of those scenarios is you can't stop it.
Right.
It is a tidal wave of sorts that it's happening to you in some ways. But then if that is the scenario, what's next? What is the adaptive move to those? It's really fascinating. This is why it's so much fun to think about these things also. But also you go from, this could be a true stepping stone to sort of like, I'll use Star Trek as like the example of like the more utopian post-scarcity future.
Right, yes, yep.
Right? Or you can easily flip the coin.
Or we all end up as paperclips. Or metaphorically.
That's right. We all have the metaphorical paperclip to whatever, But yeah, it's a wild place, and it gives so much to think about. And I guess I would say I do have one. I've got a dessert for us, because great. I don't want the conversation to feel too dark or that it's being pessimistic. But these are some of the exciting realities that we're faced with, and these will all have consequences, good, bad, somewhere in the middle. And part of our job, and one of the things that we're also, I think, part of the aim of our podcast and the things that in the work that we do, Future of Being Human initiative, is to get people to start thinking about these in their context, in their world as well, right? and to really start to ask those questions, like, what will this mean to me
Yep.
if this, like, if these are all bots, what does that mean to me?
Right.
Does that change my relationship with how I use these? Maybe I spend less time on these things and more time with other stuff. I don't know. I think that's up to people to, but I think now is a really good time to start asking those questions.
I agree.
To yourself, to your family, to your friends.
Yep.
Like, what does this mean if we're all, like, are we even talking to each other? Like,
Right.
what's happening? And how do you even, we talked about this before with video elements. How do you know you're even, the message you're sending isn't being intercepted and altered before it's even delivered, right?
That's exactly it. Yes. How do you know what reality is?
That's, we're all just in the simulation anyway.
Yes.
This is it. This is how we know we get in it. All right. So let's end with some dessert. We'll end on a high note of other things that'll blow our minds. But again, slow down 2025. So right before CES, which used to stand for the Consumer Electronics Show, now I think it just is the acronym itself.
Oh,
I think
I didn't realize that. So I hate those because
I think they lost I think CES is no longer actually an acronym. I think now it's just CES.
It's the thing formerly known as the Consumer Electronics Show.
And now it just is its own acronym.
Right.
But right before it, so NVIDIA, right, who is, if you've been paying attention to the AI game or if you've been into Bitcoin or gaming, you know the name very well. Initial massive success back in the day, of course, of doing high-end graphic video cards.
Yep.
And through cryptocurrency, that was like, because everyone was like, hey, GPUs are better than CPUs for crunching out. Yep. So if you were a gamer for the big hype cycle of Bitcoin, you could not get your hands on a high-end graphics card because they were all in these Bitcoin farms. So NVIDIA, of course, now a leading pioneer in the hardware, as well as some of the software stack for AI.
Yep.
Right before Christmas, they had announced, or right after Christmas, right before CES.
It was, yes.
They announced one of the coolest things I've seen. And then they announced some cool stuff at CES itself.
Yep.
But the one I wanted to talk about first was they released this little thing called the Jetson Orin Nano Super Developer Kit, which basically it's $249. So it's sub $300. And it basically is a little puck computer that can go into robotics. It can be, it's basically this fancy little supercomputer for under $300.
It's like a Raspberry Pi. It's like a Raspberry steroids Pi. Upon steroids.
It's a Raspberry Pi that can now do like insane level calculations and stuff.
Right.
And so again, I was like, whoa, this is huge, huge news. This is so exciting in terms of what it's doing to bring things that are out of these massive data centers, out of these massive machines, and bring them down to something. It literally fits in the palm of your hand.
Right.
And Jensen Huang, who the CEO, he's done these sort of annual fun videos of, where he's baking something for like the holidays. And last year he pulled out, it was some big, gigantic, like fancy AI server bit, chipset. One of those ones that's like a $40,000 chip.
Yep.
And this time he did it, and it was this tiny little Raspberry Pi. It literally fits in the palm of your hand.
Yep.
But that signal of, hey, we're taking these things that are massive cloud compute and putting them down into a system on a chip.
And in the hands of almost ordinary people who can start playing around with them.
If you are playing with computer electronics, you can afford a $249 board.
Yep.
And I thought that couldn't get any cooler. What a way to end 2024. Then, like, 2025 happens. Again, slow down. And now they release a $3,000 basically desktop computer, supercomputer.
Right. And so the thing that blew me away with the $3,000 one is you can effectively download something the equivalent of ChatGPT, say sort of one of these open source ones, and you can have one of these generative AI systems running locally on your computer. With almost the power, or maybe even the power of ChatGPT. And that is mind-blowing.
This to me is, I realize we're in the first couple weeks of 2025 here. And already for me, I literally just, again, got goosebumps thinking about this, because I get, you can probably tell, I'm like trying to jump out of my chair here. This is incredibly exciting because also what this means in terms of the long play here. Just to put it in context, now again, I'll put the links to this in the show notes. But it's essentially this thing called the digits, is like the product category, and it puts this Grace Blackwell, which is the architecture for the AI chipset. That basically the tagline here is that NVIDIA puts Grace Blackwell on every desk and at every AI developer's fingertips.
Yep.
This is massive because what this does also, I'm thinking about all of the researchers, so university, high school, junior high school. I mean, you can put these in a media lab pretty, with proper care and training and things. But I mean, you can start. This can go anywhere. I mean, $3,000 by perspective is like a nice high-end laptop. Right. And what's to me personally the thing that I get the most excited about, and you can look at the stats, right? It's like how many billions. So for example,
your inner geek is coming out.
Oh my God, this is crazy. But essentially, I mean, this $3,000 device can handle, I believe it's 200 billion parameters, right? So the big ones, ChatGPT, things like these are like 300. Right? Like as the biggest possible thing. I mean, it's just
mighty close.
It's incredible. But the thing that I get the most excited about is what this does to democratize access to this kind of compute. Granted, $3,000, not everyone can afford that. But organizationally, people can afford this, right? And for me, the excitement of that is pushing, because maybe I've mentioned this here, but I've written about it and talked about it, is I think that one of the true transformational powers of these AI tools and systems moving forward is moving them out of a centralized cloud environment and pushing them to the edge. Because then this goes back to the origins of knowing the privacy and the data issues and things like this, right? Apple Intelligence, that's they're using that on so if you've ever used their tools on your phone gets like super hot because everything's running on device. But being able to put that power at the edge means that you would be able to have these systems, and in the future, custom-made things. I mean, again, we come back to this agentic thing where you control it, and you would have the confidence.
And that is exactly where I was going to go. So you take something like, again, going back to Meta, but Meta's Llama, which is an open source generative AI system. You download it onto this. It's got open weights, which basically means you can craft and fine tune and control it to your needs. You effectively have, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, the possibility of a synthetic person in a black box on your desk that does not have to be connected to the internet to do its stuff.
And that's I mean, for pop culture reference, this is like having your own Jarvis from Iron Man.
Absolutely,
right?
Is. Yes.
Now the question is, will we make an Ultron out of it and make the super villain? That's the question.
This is why we need to watch sci-fi movies.
It's already told us what happens if you overjuice Jarvis, you get Ultron, and then he tries to take over the universe.
This is where you get the critical mass. You put a few of these together, and they start talking to each other.
Which you can. So that's one of the things they even mention is that you can actually essentially link these together to get even essentially. It's just insane. Like it's mind-boggling what these systems can do, and the fact that they've put these out at essentially consumer grade price points is just staggering. And so for me, like, this comes back to, I get equally excited with this type of announcement as I do with, like, in the media production world, right? Being able to, that was an industry that was a very vertical channel, and over the years with increased ubiquity access to computing devices, laptops, Chromebooks, iPads,
suddenly became accessible.
It flattened down this hierarchy and became very broad, which enabled things like, very famously, an artist like Billie Eilish got her start with her brother in their bedrooms, playing with their computer and posting stuff onto SoundCloud. They could do this with no gatekeepers in an industry that traditionally was nothing but gatekeepers, right? And so what I get really excited about is thinking about what sort of future potential innovations will we see by allowing people who have interest and the enthusiasm and the care to dive into these things, what will they create?
So and just to sort of finish this off, because I think this is a really important point. So this is both incredibly exciting, this idea of democratizing the power that we're developing with these AI systems. But then the question of responsibility comes up. How are we going to help individuals now understand how to use this power responsibly? And to me, this is a game changer. So you look at everything that's happening in the world at the moment. Of course, there are many things that we need to be training people to think about and approach responsibly and giving them the skills to do that. But to me, these technologies are at the top of the list, because if you've got this level of power in people's hands and they have no concept of how to think about social responsibility and ethics and building social value, we could have a disaster on our hands.
Very much. I mean, I was trying to end us on a happy note.
but the happy note is we have the opportunity to do this.
Not only the opportunity, but I think the obligation, right, as well. And that's a very serious piece, because, I mean, I think that's a natural, when I'm sitting here going, imagine what you could do. It's also like, well, imagine what a bad actor can do.
That's right. Yes.
And those are realistic concerns, and those are concerns with every technology, every innovation. But yeah, I mean, I think and again, that comes back to the human element here of why that's so important, is to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and to be constantly engaged in this sort of cyclical sort of like process of thinking what would happen if I do this.
Have the vision, have the wonder, the amazement, the wow, but temper that with understanding what consequences there might be out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you buy a $3,000 one of these fancy things, we would love to hear about it.
Yes.
Absolutely. And send one our way. I don't know.
Right.
NVIDIA, if you're listening. Send us a so we have a what was it? We have a synthetic media producer publicist to create. So we could use one or a couple of those. So feel free to send them our way. But yeah, no, I think this is a great place. We can wrap it up for today before I'm afraid to even look at
before too much else happens.
Something's gonna pop up. I heard a couple of dings earlier, and it's probably some other new crazy thing that's gonna just revolutionize something else and completely change it.
Here's to a wild 2025.
Here's to 2025. So Andrew, thank you as always.
Sean.
This has been a great conversation. We covered a lot, and I will be sure to put as much of that. I'll stuff as much as I can into the show notes, so you can compare and laugh between what has happened by the time you get to that and what we thought already was head spinning in 2025. So until next time, we'll thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Modem Futura. Thank you.
End translation.